January 26, 1945, the shattered ruins of Holtzwihr. France lay frozen under a bitter winter sky. Inside a battered German aid station, a medic paused at the window, watching stretcher teams drag in what little remained of his unit. Moments earlier, 250 infantrymen backed by 6 tanks had launched an assault they believed would crush a lone American position in minutes. Instead, they were torn apart by a single soldier. Out on the smoking battlefield stood a burned-out M10 tank destroyer. On top of it, alone, wounded, and half-consumed by exhaustion, was a young American lieutenant. He had no squad left, no artillery support, no hope of reinforcement. What he did have was one machine gun, and it stopped an entire German attack cold. In less than an hour, the assault force had been reduced to just 70 survivors. Those who crawled away didn't talk about the man who had held them off. They talked about the weapon that did it. It wasn't a secret prototype, and it didn't come from a hidden American laboratory. It had been rolling off assembly lines since 1933. This ordinary-looking machine gun would become the single most feared weapon in the American arsenal, not because it was advanced, but because it was unstoppable. This was the Browning M2.50 caliber, and at Holtzwihr, the Germans had just learned to hate it. In the official Medal of Honor citation that followed, the lone American gunner was identified as First Lieutenant Audie Murphy, a name that would become legendary. But even Murphy himself admitted later that he didn't win that battle alone. His true ally was the weapon bolted to the roof of that blazing M10, the Browning M2.50 caliber heavy machine gun. To German soldiers, the .50 caliber quickly became more than a battlefield threat. It was a force of nature. They watched it rip through walls, vehicles, and men with terrifying finality. Its wounds weren't like anything they had seen before. Unlike rifle rounds, which might injure or allow a chance at survival, .50 caliber impacts shattered bone, ripped limbs apart, and obliterated flesh with raw kinetic violence. German field medics began to recognize its victims instantly. There was little they could do. Amputation or death were the only outcomes. But the physical damage told only half the story. German divisions that faced prolonged .50 caliber fire didn't just suffer casualties. They broke down psychologically. Soldiers reported a growing sense of helplessness. No matter how deep they dug, no matter how carefully they moved, the next burst could kill them outright. You couldn't outthink it. You couldn't outmaneuver it. You could only hope it didn't find you. And Holtzwihr was only the beginning. From the hedgerows of Normandy to the frozen Ardennes, from North Africa to the skies above the Reich itself, German troops would soon come to recognize a sound that haunted them long after the war. A deep, thunderous rhythm that rolled across the battlefield, heavy as judgment. The sound of the M2 Browning. The transformation from German skepticism to raw fear began not on the ground, but in the sky. September 6, 1943. High over Stuttgart, squadrons of 388th Bomb Group B-17 flying fortresses carved contrails through the cold air on their way toward Germany's industrial heart. As air raid sirens wailed below, Luftwaffe interceptors roared up to meet them. Seasoned pilots flying Focke-Wulf 190s, armed with 20mm cannons and 13mm machine guns. Many of them had already survived years of combat. They expected another routine slaughter. It didn't go that way. As the German fighters dove in from high altitude, a textbook attack pass, they opened fire at 800 meters. Explosive shells streaked toward the lead bombers. And then something happened that stunned them. The sky erupted, not from planes being hit, but from B-17S fighting back. From every angle, the bomber formation lit up with muzzle flashes. Each B-17 carried 13.50 caliber Browning machine guns, and they were firing all at once. A combat box formation of 36 bombers meant 468 heavy machine guns, all using the same deadly cartridge with a lethal reach of over 1,800 meters. Together, they unleashed a moving storm of metal, more than 6,000 rounds per minute, a defensive shield no fighter had ever faced before. German pilots felt their aircraft shudder as half-inch slugs punched through wings, engines, and cockpit glass. Attack runs fell apart mid-dive. Aircraft peeled away trailing smoke and flame. The Luftwaffe lost too many planes and too many veteran pilots that day, men they couldn't replace. What they had encountered wasn't just a weapon, it was a doctrine. Where Germany relied on precision and fire discipline, America had chosen a different path, sheer, overwhelming destructive force, and the .50 caliber Browning was its instrument. The Luftwaffe didn't understand it at first. In earlier battles, German fighter doctrine had always worked: strike fast, get close, unleash cannon fire, and break away before return fire could find you. But against American bombers, that doctrine collapsed. Inside the cockpit of a B-17, every gunner had a field of fire, and together they formed an interlocking web of death. Nose guns swept the front. Waist gunners covered the flanks. Tail and top turrets guarded the rear and high angles. And suspended beneath the fuselage, the most terrifying of all, the ball turret, waited to carve apart anything that dared approach from below. There was no blind spot, no weak angle, no safe approach. By late 1943, German pilots finally understood the truth. Before they could reach cannon range, they were already inside the kill zone of the .50 caliber. Oberleutnant Heinrich Wörmke, a German ace with 93 victories, wrote to his family, "To attack the Americans is to fly through a storm of steel. You see the tracers, 1 in every 5 rounds, and you realize the sky is filled with 4 times as many bullets you cannot see. We close in for the kill, but many never come back." German command tried new tactics: high-speed head-on attacks, climbing strikes from below, slashing attacks from the sides, but the results never changed. The Browning M2 kept firing, and firing, and firing. Unlike German aircraft cannons, which jammed frequently at high altitude, the American .50 caliber worked in any condition: frozen skies at 30,000 feet, blinding snowstorms, brutal engine vibration. If one gun jammed, 12 more kept firing. Luftwaffe pilot Wolfgang Fischer put it bluntly during his 1946 debriefing: "We did not fear their fighters as much as we feared their bombers. You could fight a Mustang. You could outfly a Thunderbolt. But you could not escape the .50 caliber. The Americans hadn't built the most elegant weapon. They had built the most relentless. And for the first time in the war, German pilots began losing sleep, not over enemy aces, but over the unshakable rhythm of the Browning machine gun." If the skies over Germany had taught the Luftwaffe to fear the .50 caliber, the battlefields of France would teach the German army to hate it. June 6, 1944, Normandy. As Allied troops fought their way off the beaches, German officers expected to face traditional infantry tactics: rifles, light machine guns, mortars. Instead, they ran headfirst into something they had never experienced before: American firepower doctrine. Oberst Hans von Luck, a respected panzer commander who had fought at El Alamein and later wrote the memoir Panzer Commander, was among the first to face it. His unit of the 21st Panzer Division launched counterattacks against the Americans shortly after D-Day and immediately suffered shocking losses. It wasn't because the Americans were better shots. It wasn't because they had superior tactics. It was because they had mounted .50 caliber Browning machine guns on everything. Jeeps carried them. Half-tracks carried them. Tanks carried them. Tank destroyers, supply trucks, even engineering vehicles came bristling with heavy machine guns. American units moved like mobile fortresses, every vehicle capable of unleashing devastating fire at a moment's notice. Von Luck later wrote, "The Americans fought a different kind of war. They did not win by maneuver or finesse. They won by fire. Their .50 caliber machine guns were everywhere. Any movement during daylight brought immediate fire. It was impossible to advance without losing men." The German army had built its doctrine around the machine gun, but not like this. The MG-42 was deadly, fast, and feared, but it was a squad weapon. It was precise, disciplined, German. The American .50 caliber was something else entirely: raw, unfiltered destruction, and it was only the beginning. Next, the Americans would weaponize it into a strategy that seemed almost unfair, a tactic that drove German soldiers to despair. The Germans had trained for every kind of warfare: armored assaults, urban combat, defensive withdrawals. But nothing had prepared them for the way Americans used fire. They didn't wait for targets. They created them. American infantry and armored units used a brutally simple doctrine: reconnaissance by fire. Instead of cautiously advancing and risking ambush, U.S. forces opened up with their .50 caliber machine guns on anything that might conceal an enemy: hedgerows, barns, tree lines, stone walls, church towers. They didn't need to confirm if Germans were there. They just filled the landscape with fire and forced the enemy to reveal themselves. To the Germans, it was insanity. To the Americans, it was insurance. With millions of rounds of ammunition behind them, U.S. troops could afford to fire until the battlefield answered. If they hit nothing, they lost nothing. If they hit something, they found a target and destroyed it. A captured German squad leader described it this way during a U.S. Army interrogation: "They fired at everything. They fired at nothing. They did not wait to see us. They forced us to stay underground. You could not move. If you moved, you died. We fought the Russians for years, but we never experienced this." Pinned by .50 caliber fire that cut through stone and shattered timber, German units quickly learned the math. Movement meant death. Advancement meant death. Returning fire meant death. The MG-42 may have been called Hitler's buzzsaw, but the M2 Browning earned no nickname. It earned silence. The kind of silence that came from German soldiers too afraid to move. And if the .50 caliber dominated the battlefield, what came next dominated the entire countryside. The Germans had long relied on ambush tactics to cripple enemy supply lines. Against the British and Soviets, these tactics worked. Cut the logistics, starve the front line. That was the rule of war. But when German infantry teams in France tried the same ambush tactics against American convoys, they were met with disaster. A typical German ambush called for letting the lead vehicles pass, then disabling one or two trucks in the middle to block the road. Once the column was trapped, German infantry, machine guns, and Panzerfaust teams would strike from both sides. That strategy collapsed the moment it met the .50 caliber. Unlike any army before them, the Americans armed every supply convoy like a combat unit. Every few vehicles carried an M2 Browning on a ring mount, manned by drivers and assistant drivers who trained like gunners. When the first shots of an ambush opened up, the Americans didn't scatter. They counterattacked. Immediately, without orders, with devastating volume. German veterans described the shock in post-war interrogations. "We never expected supply troops to fight like infantry. We opened fire, and instantly 50 caliber guns were shooting at us from everywhere. Not one or two guns, dozens. The air turned to steel. American convoy doctrine used a brutal tactic, alternating suppressive fire. Vehicles on the right side of the road fired right. Vehicles on the left fired left. Heavy machine gun fire overlapped in lethal crisscross patterns. German ambush teams found themselves hit from both sides in seconds. Their plan, to isolate and destroy convoys, had backfired. It was the ambushers who were being ambushed. By late 1944, German reports admitted what frontline infantry already knew: do not attack American convoys. The cost is too high. The 50 caliber Browning hadn't just protected supplies, it had protected American momentum, and momentum wins wars. Now the Germans faced a weapon they feared on the ground, but they were about to meet it again, from above. If the .50 caliber Browning ruled the ground, then in the sky it became a force of annihilation. The Germans soon learned to fear a new sound, one that came screaming from above. A roar like tearing metal, followed by a thunderous ripping that shredded the earth itself. It belonged to one aircraft, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. American pilots called it the Jug. German soldiers had another name for it: Der Schlachter, the Butcher. The P-47 was the heaviest single-engine fighter of the war. Built like a flying tank, it could dive at over 500 miles per hour and still pull out. And lining both wings were 8 Browning M2.50 caliber machine guns, more firepower than some entire German infantry companies. Each Thunderbolt could unleash 4,000 rounds per minute, ripping apart anything beneath it: half-tracks, fuel trucks, troop columns, even locomotives. A four-plane flight of P-47s meant 32.50 caliber guns firing at once. Nothing below survived. German truck convoys disappeared in seconds. Artillery positions were crippled before they could fire. Retreating columns were vaporized on open roads. For German soldiers, strafing attacks were worse than artillery. They were personal. You could hear the guns getting closer. You could see the fire ripping toward you. A German supply sergeant recalled in interrogation, "You hear the engines first, always too late. Then the ground erupts. Trees explode, metal screams, men vanish. You cannot fight. You cannot hide. You only pray he chooses another target." The 50 caliber didn't just dominate battle. It paralyzed entire sectors. Movement during daylight became suicide. The German army was forced into darkness. Supplies moved only at night, under clouds, or not at all. The Wehrmacht had fought the Red Army for years and survived. But against American air power, it was crushed by machine guns. And still, the worst was yet to come. The M2 Browning didn't just kill, it controlled the battlefield. By late 1944, German infantry had learned a brutal truth. The Americans didn't wait to receive fire. They opened fire first. Any position that looked suspicious, any ridge line, window, stone wall, or tree line was immediately blanketed in .50 caliber bursts. U.S. units didn't need confirmation. They assumed the enemy was everywhere and fired until they were right. American commanders called it fire superiority. German soldiers had another word for it: madness. A German NCO captured near Aachen described the experience. "They do not fight like soldiers. They fight like factories. We fire once. They fire 1,000 times. There is no cover from the 50. It finds you." Even when Germans weren't taking casualties, they were being crushed by constant suppression. Movement became impossible. Units stopped advancing. Soldiers refused to leave cover. Morale collapsed under fire so intense that survival felt like luck instead of skill. And the physics of the .50 caliber only fueled the fear. Its heavy rounds punched through stone walls and sandbags. Trees shattered into splinters under fire. Armor plating on trucks and half-tracks disintegrated. Even a near hit could kill. Shock waves shattered organs inside the body. In night battles, the terror multiplied. The Americans mixed tracer rounds into their belts, one visible bullet for every 4 unseen. Red streams of fire tore through the dark like burning sky whips. German soldiers called them the devil's fingers. One Wehrmacht infantryman put it simply: "At night, you watch the tracers reach for you. You can see death coming." And while German gunners conserved precious ammunition, American units fired as if the war would last forever, because for them it could. When the war moved into cities, Cannes, Aachen, Metz, Cologne, German soldiers believed urban terrain would finally neutralize the American firepower advantage. Streets could be defended, buildings provided cover, close combat favored the defender, until the .50 caliber proved them wrong. The Browning M2 turned every street into a firing lane and every building into a death trap. It didn't matter how thick the walls were: stone, plaster, timber. 50 caliber rounds punched straight through, tearing through multiple rooms before stopping. American tank commanders quickly developed a ruthless method for clearing city blocks. Tanks halted at intersections. The commander's .50 caliber turret gun scanned every window and rooftop. The gunner unleashed sweeping bursts across entire facades. Only after suppressing everything did infantry move forward. German defenders learned the terrible truth: cover was an illusion. Even hiding deep inside buildings wasn't safe. The 50 caliber would chew through doors, furniture, stairwells, anything a man could crouch behind. A Panzerfaust operator described his helplessness. "To fire, I must raise my head and aim. But the moment I move, the 50 caliber opens fire. It does not miss. It does not stop. It cuts the walls apart." Urban ambush teams were slaughtered before they could get into firing position. Entire squads abandoned buildings because staying inside meant being buried in rubble. The Browning didn't just suppress defenders, it erased their will to fight.
when 4.50 cals fired together. Just when German infantry thought they had seen the worst of American firepower, something new appeared on the battlefield, something so destructive that German troops gave it a name spoken with real fear. They called it Der Fleischwolf, the meat grinder. Its official name was the M16 multiple-gun motor carriage, a half-track mounting 4 Browning M2.50 caliber machine guns in a powered rotating turret. Originally built as an anti-aircraft weapon, it was soon repurposed for ground combat. The results were shocking. Each M16 could fire nearly 2,000 rounds per minute, a storm of heavy caliber fire that shredded infantry, trucks, carts, and even light armor. When German troops launched infantry attacks, these quad-mount .50 cals didn't just defend, they vacuumed battlefields clean. Men were cut down trying to cross fields. Ambush teams were erased before they could reload. Trees disintegrated into splinters, bodies vanished in the mud, and entire formations broke at the sight of the quad turret turning toward them. An official report from the 473rd AAA Battalion, dated November 1944, simply stated, "The primary mission of this vehicle is officially anti-aircraft. In practice, it is used almost entirely against ground targets with great effect." To American troops, it was just another weapon in the arsenal. To German soldiers, it was mass death on tracks. But the worst part wasn't its firepower. It was that there seemed to be no end to American ammunition. 50 caliber belts kept coming, hour after hour, day after day. Germany wasn't just losing ground, it was losing the ability to fight. Why ambush, maneuver, and strategy stopped mattering. By late 1944, German commanders began to understand the real enemy. It wasn't just the .50 caliber Browning, it was American logistics. The machine gun itself was only part of the equation. The endless ammunition behind it was what made it a weapon of domination. German front-line units lived with ration supply. Every bullet had to matter. Every shot had to count. They saved ammunition for confirmed targets. The Americans did the opposite. They used ammunition as a tactical advantage. They didn't fire just to kill. They fired to control space, to suppress movement, and to break enemy morale. And they could do it because behind every Browning M2 was a supply chain that never stopped moving. German ambush teams couldn't stop convoys. German artillery couldn't cut U.S. fuel. German raids couldn't disrupt supply. American convoys ran day and night. They replaced trucks faster than the Germans could destroy them. They replaced guns in hours, engines in minutes, ammunition in mountains. A German officer summarized it after the war. "We ran out of everything." They never ran out of bullets, and those bullets, more than any other weapon in the American arsenal, were .50 caliber. That supply superiority didn't just give the Americans firepower, it gave them freedom. They fought when they wanted. They advanced when they wanted. They forced German units to react instead of attack. Soon, German units stopped maneuvering in daylight. Then they stopped using roads. Then they stopped trying to hold positions. Not because they lacked courage, but because it was suicide to move. The 50 caliber had turned war into mathematics, and for Germany, the equation had no solution. The .50 cal didn't just kill. It broke minds. By the winter of 1944 to 45, something had changed in the German army. Veterans who had survived Stalingrad, Kursk, and El Alamein, men who had faced Soviet armor and British commandos, now found themselves terrified of a machine gun. The 50 caliber Browning had become more than a weapon. It was a presence, always there, always firing, always waiting. German medical officers began logging a new kind of casualty, men with no physical wounds who could no longer fight. Soldiers who flinched at every distant thump of heavy gunfire, units that froze under fire and refused to advance, platoons that broke without being attacked. They called it combat exhaustion. Today we call it psychological collapse. German reports from the Western Front describe it in chilling terms. A man can defend himself against a rifle. He can survive artillery by taking cover. But against the .50 caliber there is no defense. If it sees you, you die. Survivors of .50 caliber attacks described terrifying new battlefield realities. Cover didn't protect you. Distance didn't save you. Skill didn't matter. Only luck determined who lived and who died. Worst of all, the .50 caliber didn't fight fair. It attacked you from the ground. It attacked you from jeeps, tanks, half-tracks, trucks, boats, and then it came screaming down from the sky on P-47s. A German infantryman said it best: "You never escape it. You only move from one range to another. With every battle, German tactics dissolved. Movement stopped. Resistance crumbled. And one realization spread across every front line. This wasn't a war of strategy anymore. It was industrial execution." The brutal science behind the Browning. To the Germans, the .50 caliber Browning felt like black magic, but its power came from cold engineering. Designed by legendary American gunsmith John M. Browning, the M2 heavy machine gun was finalized in 1933 after years of refinement. It was simple, it was rugged, it was brutal, and it was built to work anywhere, on the ground, at sea, or 30,000 feet above Europe. Its cartridge alone struck fear into enemy soldiers. .50 BMG, 12.7 by 99 millimeters, 707 grain projectile, muzzle velocity, 2,900 feet per second. Energy, over 12,000 foot-pounds. This was not a rifle round. It was a steam hammer launched from a gun barrel. The M2 could punch through 19 millimeters of armor at 500 meters, tear through concrete, brick, and timber, shatter engine blocks and gun shields, kill with bone-break shock impact even on near misses, fire 450 to 575 rounds per minute, hour after hour. Where German weapons were fast but fragile, the MG-42, for example, fired twice as fast but jammed frequently. The M2 Browning was built for endurance. It shrugged off sand, mud, snow, ice, and overuse. Crews said if it had a barrel and a belt, it would fire, and that reliability became its deadliest feature. In a war of attrition, a weapon that never stops shooting always wins. The Browning was no masterpiece of precision, it was a masterpiece of survival. The Germans had brilliant engineers and finely crafted weapons. The Americans had something else: industry. John Browning had given the U.S. military a perfect weapon platform, but it was American factories that turned it into a force of destruction the world had never seen. From Detroit to Chicago, Cleveland to Hartford, the Browning M2 rolled out of assembly lines not by the thousand, but by the hundreds of thousands. Produced by companies like Colt, AC Spark Plug, Frigidaire, and Guide Lamp, the M2 wasn't treated like a weapon. It was treated like a product. Nearly 2 million .50 caliber machine guns of all variants produced over 450,000, M2HB heavy barrel versions built for ground combat, billions of rounds of ammunition manufactured standard issue on bombers, fighters, tanks, trucks, ships, and infantry positions. Germany could never match that scale. Precision weapons meant nothing when they broke, jammed, or ran out of ammunition. Elegance loses wars. Quantity wins them. A German general later wrote, "American soldiers always had enough of everything. Enough food, enough fuel, enough ammunition. We had enough nothing." The M2 Browning didn't just dominate because it was powerful. It dominated because it never ran out. And by 1945, the Germans weren't being defeated by men. They were being drowned in firepower. The moment Germany realized it couldn't win. By 1945, German commanders faced a nightmare they could not solve. Their tactics, once feared across Europe, no longer mattered. They had become obsolete. The German army doctrine was built on maneuver, discipline, and tactical mastery. Their infantry squads revolved around the MG-42, and their panzer counterattacks were legendary. Against the Soviets, they fought massive tank battles. Against the British, they fought with speed and precision. But against the Americans, they fought mathematics. Wherever German units appeared, they were instantly met by overwhelming streams of .50 caliber fire. Not artillery, not airstrikes. A machine gun that the Americans carried everywhere. A German battalion preparing to attack a U.S. position didn't face one or two of them. It faced 50, 100, sometimes more, all fully supplied, all firing without restraint. The German way of fighting, careful bursts of fire, ammunition discipline, tactical patience, collapsed in the face of American doctrine. suppress everything, move forward, keep firing. American units operated under a brutal rule. If it moves, shoot it. If it shoots back, destroy it. If you're not sure, fire anyway. The .50 caliber made that possible. German officers described their frustration in post-war reports. We fought men. The Americans fought with machines. Our best units were beaten by firepower before they reached the battlefield. The .50 caliber was everywhere. We could not escape it. In the end, the German army wasn't outmaneuvered. It was outproduced, outsupplied, and outgunned, and nothing symbolized that more than the Browning M2. When the war in Europe finally ended in May 1945, the wreckage of the Third Reich stretched from the Rhine to Berlin. But among the burned-out tanks and shattered cities stood a weapon that had not only survived the war, it was just getting started. The Browning M 2.50 caliber was never retired, never replaced, never improved upon in any meaningful way, because it didn't need to be. It fought in World War II, then Korea, then Vietnam, then Iraq, Afghanistan, and beyond. It serves today on American Humvees, helicopters, and naval ships around the world, more than 90 years after it first entered service. No other machine gun in history has stayed in frontline use this long. Why? Because the M2 does exactly what war demands. It fires in any condition. It kills anything it hits. It never breaks, and it never stops. It has outlived every soldier who first carried it. It has survived every military doctrine that used it. It has destroyed empires, crushed armies, and rewritten the rules of warfare. In the end, the Germans didn't fear the .50 caliber because it was advanced. They feared it because it always worked. The Germans never hated the .50 caliber Browning because it was elegant. They didn't hate it because it was advanced. They didn't even hate it because of what it did to the men it hit. They hated it because of what it represented. It was the weapon of a nation that had embraced industrial war, a nation that believed firepower was cheaper than lives, a nation that treated war like a production problem and solved it. The M2 Browning was never just a machine gun. It was a message. Skill can be matched, courage can be met, tactics can be countered, but production always wins. Germany fought with precision. America fought with power. Germany built weapons. America built arsenals. Germany calculated tactics. America calculated output. And when these philosophies met on the battlefield, German soldiers learned the truth. No amount of training or bravery could overcome relentless fire. The Browning M2 didn't just win firefights, it won a war.